And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of StillCurtain.com. Joining me, as always, is Still Curtain contributor Shayne Kubas. We are going to talk about the Steelers' win today, Cooper Kupp trade rumors heating up here, Russell Wilson, a big topic, and we're going to get to him. We're going to dive into more detail about his performance against the Jets, his debut performance for the Steelers, and what it means for this team moving forward. We're also going to preview the Steelers versus Giants Monday Night Football game and what that means for Pittsburgh with some, I think, Shayne, Defensive Player of the Year odds kind of on the line here for that one. That's kind of an underlining story for this game. TJ Watt, Dexter Lawrence, which guy shows up, because those are the two top players in DPOI odds right now. So we'll see how things play out there. But let's start with some trending news. First, Shayne, let's talk about the Steelers. 37-15 blowout win over the Jets in week 7. I have to admit, I did not see this coming. In fact, I predicted the Jets to win in a close game. It just seemed like one of those games for the Steelers where, yes, it was in prime time, but you are playing Aaron Rodgers, albeit an old Aaron Rodgers. You're playing a defense that only allows 18 points a game. The Jets had just acquired Devontae Adams. We didn't know how things were going to go with Russell Wilson in his first game with the Steelers. But it's hard not to be pleased with the results anytime you win by multiple scores, and you were sticking it to the Jets at that point. Shayne, what are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, myself, I had them losing 24-14, I think was my prediction, and looked pretty rough the first 2 quarters of this game for the most part. You know, we kind of got it close at the end, halftime, 15-13. But yeah, the second half, they just took off. Steelers offense played much better. The Jets offense couldn't get anything going. B.D. Bishop took over the game defensively, weirdly enough, which we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But just a weird game, but obviously a very good one for the Steelers. It was pretty dominant in the second half, especially, like I said. And we'll kind of just see, how much of this is translatable moving forward. And I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about that as we go through the game.
Yeah, Shayne, and the Steelers scored every time they touched the ball in the second half of the game. Field goal, 3 touchdowns, even going back to the second quarter, a touchdown just before the half. And so they really turned things on in this one. Is it sustainable? We'll talk about that soon here. But it's nice to see the Steelers advance to 5-2. Yeah. They're sitting pretty in the AFC. That is not as crowded, Shayne, as a lot of people thought that it would be. Like we assumed the Jets would be competitors. We assumed the Dolphins would be competitors. The Dolphins aren't even close to that without Tua, and they've fallen apart completely. So really the teams fighting for those wild card spots is extremely limited right now. You're talking the Steelers are a clear-cut favorite to, if they don't win the division, to at least grab one of those 3 wild card spots. I think it would take a pretty big collapse probably at this point, just because you look at the rest of the competition, like the Chargers, Colts. Like, is there anybody else even in that mix right now? It's kind of rough in the AFC.
Yeah, I mean, the AFC is in a weird spot where, a lot of the best teams projected in going into the season are either having a slow start or just falling off completely. Like, even you look at a Browns team that a lot of people really liked, and the roster was really good. Obviously, they were coming off a playoff berth last year. They just have been quarterbacked into oblivion, essentially, by Deshaun Watson prior to his injury. Like, there's a lot of teams, same thing, like you mentioned the Dolphins. Like, what would they look like right now? And they weren't looking particularly great, even with 2 in there, but have to imagine they have a couple more wins than they currently do. Like, it's kind of a mess outside of a couple top teams. And right now the Steelers are one of those top teams record-wise.
Yeah, they are. Let's talk about that AFC North for a second, Shayne. I know that wasn't on the dock here for today, but Baltimore Ravens they just beat the Buccaneers. I was optimistic in that game that the Bucs would have them. They were looking good early on, and then the Ravens just did their thing. They ran away from that game. So the Ravens still, even though the Steelers and Ravens both have 5-2 records, Ravens have the only divisional win right now. They beat the Bengals in that 41-38 shootout game a couple weeks back. And so record-wise tied. It's going to come down to head-to-head, I think, between those two, as long as the Steelers can kind of keep pace until then. But Shayne, the big story here this week in the AFC North is obviously Deshaun Watson out for the season, ruptured Achilles. Boy, did they ever make a bad decision at quarterback there. And I truly feel for Browns fans, because after years and years, you go decades without having competent quarterback play. You had like 1 Pro Bowl year in Derek Anderson, and that's like all you've had in my lifetime, really.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you try to go out and you make that blockbuster move because you've been sitting on your hands all this time, and you try to go out and do something, albeit with a guy that's got a questionable history.
That's being generous, yeah, but yeah.
Not good.
Yeah, not great.
And then Watson can't even stay on the field. I mean, he's been injured, and every time the Browns have had him so far, now a season-ending injury. I mean, if you break this contract down in terms of like what he's getting paid per game that he's played with the Browns, it's an absurd amount, and they haven't come close to reaching that, and they're not going to.
No, and it's one thing for them to make this decision with everything happening with him from a out of football perspective, right? Like that was obviously an issue that has been rehashed enough times. I don't need to go into it, but we know how poor that probably was from a publicity standpoint.
Yeah.
But then to pay a guy this money who then comes in and, like you said, doesn't really play that much. And when he does play, he might be the worst starter in the league. Like that's what's really deflating for the Browns, because if you could have gotten a season with him playing at the level he did in Houston with this roster and go on a deep playoff run, or maybe even a Super Bowl run, you can maybe down the line, even if things fall apart, excuse away some of the stuff. But for him to be quite literally the worst quarterback in football this year that's played at least the majority of the snaps is just a gut punch on top of the other gut punches. Like it's really, truly just it kind of feels like they're just beating them down every week whenever he was playing. And the fact that your only win is against a Jaguars team that actively finds ways to lose games, it's just, again, for Browns fans, even from a Steelers fan, I have to say I feel for you, because this is just horrendous in every possible way.
Yeah, such a discouraging state they're in. And if I recall the figure, Deshaun Watson is going to count against the cap $72 million each of the next 2 years. And according to Adam Schefter, that's money that can't be moved. Like the hit against the cap is enormous because they backloaded that deal trying to capitalize on a window, and it just did not work out at all. In a way, Shayne, I was optimistic about. I really kind of wanted Steelers to match up against Deshaun Watson the way that he was.
Honestly.
Well, we'll see who they get by then. It might be Jameis Winston. I don't know. I mean, we'll see what the Browns.
That's who should be playing for now, but we'll see if that lasts. But Jameis, if for all his faults, he's probably going to be more productive, if nothing else. You know, he's going to be maybe Joe Flacco-esque in the way that he attacks downfield, and it's either going to be awesome or it's going to be terrible, but at least something happens. So.
Yeah, more competent probably than what we've seen so far.
I assume
Shayne, let's talk about some of the trades happening around the NFL. Wednesday morning here, the Kansas City Chiefs traded for DeAndre Hopkins. This ended up being like the third big wide receiver trade. I say big wide receiver trade. I mean, he's big name, not the same player that he once was, obviously. But this comes a week after Devontae Adams was traded to the Jets. Amari Cooper was traded to the Bills. And so we're seeing like these rapid fire movements now, just days away from the NFL trade deadline, November 5th. So that's coming right up here. What do you make of this trade to the Chiefs? Do you think that's something that aids them enough to give them that boost on offense?
I think it at least gives them somebody that they can rely on key situations besides the Kelce's of the world, and maybe like Juju when he's healthy too. Now they've added him. Like they're just not getting enough from the other players. Like Kelce is still not producing at the level he used to, but you at least know that there's potential for that any given week. Xavier Worthy has been very hit or miss, very up and down. The speed element really hasn't played a huge factor outside of a couple plays. Sky Moore is unplayable, in my opinion, as much as that makes me sad. I really liked him coming out, but he just can't play. It's kind of just reality at this point. And then again, like Juju's maybe your best receiver when he's healthy. And no offense to Juju, but like we kind of know that that's not ideal, right? Now they're getting it done. They're 6-0. It's not like we can sit here and say like, oh man, the Chiefs are truly struggling. Like this is a team that is quarterbacked by a guy that, despite his numbers, is probably the only quarterback in the NFL that could get this specific team to 6-0. Like that's kind of what they're dealing with. And would they love to add something like a Hopkins to make it easier for him and actually let the offense work better? Yeah, but I don't know how much this is ultimately going to matter. I think getting someone maybe like a Cooper Kupp, who we're going to be talking about later, something like that might have really moved the needle for them. But I think this just gives them somebody that, assuming they can get the chemistry going quickly, can at least help them on gotta-have-it situations.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it sounds like he might be playing the X. Like it's not a replacement for what you lost here with Rashee Rice. Like Rice was the yak guy for the Chiefs and was able to do everything from the slot. I don't know if he's going to be used that way. But more importantly, what all you guys want to know, we could ramble on about the Chiefs, but I'll let you go listen to the Arrowhead Addict podcast.
Yes, they'll talk about that.
If you want to listen to that. Let's talk about the Steelers and how this DeAndre Hopkins trade impacts Pittsburgh. And it does in a way, because for one thing, it takes one receiver off the table, one that a lot of fans weren't overly optimistic about anyway. You're kind of getting the older, a little bit more washed version of George Pickens, a little bit of redundancy there. Hopkins still a good player at the catch point and stuff, doesn't offer a lot after the catch. But what this did, Shayne, was it increased Pittsburgh's odds substantially of landing Cooper Kupp, the player that we're going to talk about here in a little bit. And so because of this trade, according to Sports Betting AG, the Steelers are now minus 125, the odds-on favorite to land Kupp. The next highest team, the Chargers, at plus 400, and then the Bucks at plus 600. So the Steelers have really high odds to do that. I'm going to table that discussion about Kupp, though, for a little bit later. And we're going to talk about what other potential trade targets the Steelers could go out and look for. There are some, but obviously it has to be the right situation, right? Like you're not going to steal one from a competitor or even a team that is fighting to make a wild card. So we're going to go through some of those bottom dwelling teams who might be willing to get rid of a receiver before the deadline for some draft capital and what options are available to this team. Before we do that, it's the greatest time of the year again. Football is back, and it's here to stay till February. Win up to 1,000 times your money just by choosing higher or lower on your favorite player stats, i.e. touchdowns, passing yards, and more. The sign-up process is smooth, and they have a really slick mobile app. And I have the ability to win some real money while rooting for my favorite players. Making picks on Underdog is straightforward, and signing up is even easier. Just head over to Underdog's simple-to-use mobile app or UnderdogFantasy.com. Sign up with promo code STILLCURTAIN, and Underdog will give you a free pick to use on your first cash pick'em, plus up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you deposit. That's Underdog Fantasy. Promo code STILLCURTAIN to claim your new customer special of a free pick and your deposit offer. Must be 18 plus, 21 plus Massachusetts and Arizona, 19 plus Alabama and Nebraska, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 1-800-639-8783, or text NEXT STEP to 53342. New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467369. All right, Shayne, let's talk about the Steelers versus Jets. We're going to share our notes, offense, defense, special teams. Let's start with the offensive side of the ball here. And we're going to talk about Russell Wilson in more detail. But what do you make of the overall offensive performance in this game? Was it a step up from what we've seen in previous weeks in terms of passing, rushing? Obviously, Najee Harris had another really good game. But what are just your overall thoughts on the offense here?
Obviously, one of their best, if not the best, performance we've seen in quite some time overall. I think especially when you factor in the offensive line injuries and the fact that it wasn't really a true problem overall. They did allow a decent amount of pressure, but not so much that Wilson was unable to be productive and effective. So you really got to give them a lot of credit. And then Najee Harris, man, back-to-back games by a guy that admittedly, I've always been a little bit higher on than a lot of people in the Steelers fan base, which I understand. It's tough when a guy's a first-round pick running back and isn't super efficient or explosive. But when he's on and when the blocking is good enough to give him some space to move, he really has a special ability to kind of just break tackles and create tough yards. And honestly, I think they kind of blew the whistle a little early on a couple of them. He could have had even more than he did, in my opinion. But either way, almost 5 yards of carry, another touchdown. Like, he was really the star of the show. Plus, of course, the receivers kind of balled out compared to what we've been seeing. Pickens makes a couple of huge plays. Pat Freiermuth gets in the action on that nice little wheel route, and also the catch after run after the catch play. Just a lot of good stuff from all of the playmakers on the team.
Yeah, Shayne, I would go as far to say this is Najee's best 2-game stretch of his career. I really think
I would say so.
Maybe not in terms of statistically. I have to go look at that, but in terms
even
of
statistically, maybe.
It might be. I mean, back-to-back 100-yard performances, nearly averaged 5 yards a carry in this game. Now, to his credit, and credit the offensive line. There were some big holes in this game. I
There
cut some
was,
of those up, but that's what a running back needs to be successful. And if you wonder if Najee had this all the time, if we wouldn't have been so hard on him these past 3 years. You remember the offensive line that he came into, which was not good. You had Dan Moore, Kendrick Green, Kevin Dotson, who wasn't good when he was on the Steelers, and they were Chokuma Okorafor. They were struggling. Trey Turner, that was a bad line. It was a bad offensive line. And so you can see that the running back's value obviously is tied to your scheme and your offensive line. If you don't have that, I think that's why I hated the process so bad, Shayne, in the process of taking a running back in the first round pick, especially when you don't have an offensive line in place, and you're just assuming that that running back's going to solve all your problems. Well, now the Steelers have 4 injured offensive linemen. I mean, three of them are out for the season in Nate Herbig, James Daniels, and Troy Fautanu, but he's still making it work. The line is still creating some holes, and Najee is taking advantage. Every time he gets one of those holes, he's taking advantage. And 2 of the best runs that I've seen of his entire career came in back-to-back weeks up the left sideline there, making guys miss. And so definitely pleased with his performance overall. Nice to see Jaylen Warren get involved now too. I think he's getting a little bit healthier finally, dealing with a hamstring and a knee. Early this year, he's getting some of that explosion back. For some reason, though, it seems like when Warren has run the ball this year, outside of a carry or two, there's just no space at all for him to work with.
It's literally the opposite of the last 2 years.
Yeah,
with these
it truly has
like
been.
Warren, admittedly, he has more explosiveness. So when there is a hole, he's going to get through it quicker. But the blocking has pretty much always been better when Warren's in there compared to Najee the last 2 years. But this year it's been different, right? And I think something that people have to understand is that unless you are a truly special running back, right? And even special running backs still have games where if the line isn't doing enough for them, they can't really produce. But unless you're truly special, it's really hard to be productive behind an offensive line that isn't giving you pretty sizable holes, right? That's just kind of the nature of the sport. It's why, despite the fact that they never get the love they deserve, maybe this is me playing the offensive line in high school, coming out a little bit too and getting upset about it, but you don't get a lot of credit as an offensive line, especially if you're not very good. Like if you're not the best at it or the worst at it, you don't really get talked about a lot, right? Like the best lines always get praised because they're like, oh, look at all these holes, look at the offensive weapons. And when you're really bad, everybody talks about how bad you are, right? But when you're kind of in that middle-ish tier, you don't really get talked about a lot, even if you are a big part of the success of the offense. So you've seen now how much that matters, how much space matters for running backs. And unfortunately, this year for Warren, it's not really worked out as well for him as it has for Najee recently.
Yeah, but we're obviously thrilled to see the running game is starting to fire on all cylinders here, even with a makeshift offensive line. And look, those guys were really getting into it too. Like I think that Mason McCormick's going to be a stud. I really do. Just watching him early in his career right now, it's hard not to be impressed with what he's done. And so if Steelers can get Zach Frazier back after the bye week, have McCormick, that might be the future of your offensive line or your interior offensive line right there. So definitely pleased with what we've seen from them so far. George Pickens, Shayne, I think had an awesome game, and it makes you wonder. Now he's not going to come out and say it. And we actually have a YouTube short where he was on a show and he was talking about, who do you prefer to play with, Justin Fields or Russell Wilson? Obviously he did the right thing by not answering that question. He praised both of those guys, but I bet you in secret, he would tell you that he might prefer to play with Wilson just because we saw such an uptick in his production this week. Lots of moon ball opportunities down the field. Not always the most accurate passes. We're going to talk about Wilson's game here in just a little bit. But I think that is something that's to monitor moving forward, because prior to that, these last 2 games, he was really in a slump. I think he had 26 yards and 57 yards over his last 2 games. Obviously, he's had kind of dealt with the attitude issues that we've been addressing before, and so I think that is something to monitor for sure. But I think we'll keep tabs on that. Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington. It's nice to see these guys getting involved. Darnell on the year, Shayne, has caught 10 of 11 targets for 91 yards and a touchdown, has 131 passer rating when targeted this year. Like, I know that he's 6'7" and 290 pounds. I would still try to find ways to get him the ball. I know that blocking's his thing first, but he can kind of move in space, and guys are afraid to tackle him. I mean, you get that train rolling. I mean, that's not something you want to get your head down and try to bring that guy down.
Yeah, that little boot action play or just toss it to him in the flat they were kind of spamming that for a little bit there, and it was working admittedly for the most part. But yeah, if you just get this guy, there's two ways in my opinion to get Darnell Washington going. You either get him moving from the snap and throw him a ball where he's already running, where he can get up to speed pretty quickly. Because again, this is a guy who ran like a 4.6 40 at his size. Like, he's not slow. He just doesn't get going very quickly, right? So if you get him on the move already, you can get some damage in after the catch with him. Again, guys don't want to tackle a guy that's basically an offensive tackle running around out there. So that's definitely an element of things. And then in the red zone, like we already saw with his one touchdown this year, right? Where if you can get him matched up with pretty much anybody in the sport that plays defense, honestly, it's going to be a mismatch size-wise. So you just don't see many guys nowadays that are that big out there on offense that aren't blocking entirely. So it's an interesting wrinkle that I hope they continue to go to. And in Pat, too, like, he needs to be a bigger part of the offense, even though he did have two big catches in this game.
Yeah, Darnell, I don't know if any other team has a guy that you could legitimately say he's a third offensive tackle, and he's also just a freight train moving once you get him the ball in space, too. So interesting player. For sure. Anything else you want to touch on the offensive side of the ball, Shayne? We'll move on.
Like I said, I touched on a little bit of everything, but just in general, everybody seemed to play up to the competition this week. They really tried to stick it to the Jets. And, will we get that every week? I don't know. We'll talk more about how sustainable this offensive effort was later, but got to give pretty much everybody in the offense a lot of credit this week.
Agreed, Shayne. And before we move on, if you have a question here and you want to drop it in the chat, please feel free to do so. Victor chimes in, we should trade for DK Metcalf, reunite Wilson with Metcalf. Yeah, I mean, all for that. The problem is Seattle probably won't be. And that's right now, the Seahawks are leading their division. They are 4-3. Because so they're not going to want to give away a chip that can help them potentially win the NFC West. I don't think they'll probably finish that way, honestly.
I don't think so either, but it's there.
It is wide open, and they're a game ahead of the competition right now. And so I can't see them doing that move. If they were in a worse state, if they were 2 wins worse right now, I could see that being a possibility and maybe just trying to get some draft capital out of that. But I can't see it happening right now. There is another name in Seattle, though, that we can talk about here in just a little bit when we get to that. It's potential, but again, for the same reasons, they're not going to want to trade players away when they are on track to win the division as of right now.
Right.
All right, Shayne, let's talk about the defense now. And TJ Watt, I have to say, if you're a box score checker, you're going to think that he's been really quiet these past couple weeks here. But he hasn't been, because when you go and watch the All-22 film, he has drawn so much attention. And I cut this up, Shayne, just yesterday. If you want to check it out, it's on my Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. There were 29 snaps against the Jets where New York devoted at least 2 players to stopping TJ Watt, whether that's against the run or the pass. 2 guys devoted to him. That includes chips and double teams. He was accounted for at all times, essentially, because they knew what kind of a game wrecker he was. And Shayne, I watched also every snap that he had a true one-on-one. That ball was out at the snap of a finger. There was not a chance to get a pressure on the quarterback. And so if you look at Watt in this game, he only had one pressure, didn't record a sack. It was quiet in this game. He was only quiet in this game because the Jets had to devote so many resources to taking him out of this one. And so you can see that in this sense, Shayne, it worked for the Steelers, because on the opposite side, Highsmith was one-on-one with an aging Tyron Smith who has been struggling, and he was able to whip him around the edge a few times because there is no help over there. And you even look at the chip rate stat from Pro Football Focus. Highsmith and Herbig are among the least chipped players in the NFL, which makes sense because Watt's always drawing the chip on the other side. And in this case, it helped them out, Shayne. But what I would like to know your opinion is, should the Steelers try to get more creative with Watt, move him around and keep teams guessing and force them to make adjustments on offense? Or should you keep leaving him over there and let Highsmith and Herbig, as soon as he comes back here after the bye, take advantage of these opportunities in one-on-one situations?
I think it's really tough because it's really hard to quantify how much Watt's attention that he gets is helping the defense and how much it's hurting him, in the sense that you love your best player to get opportunities to get after the quarterback more, right? Because right now, teams have pretty much decided, all right, TJ Watt is not beating us. I do not care if we have to commit 3 guys to him. I don't care if we have to leave our worst tackle one-on-one. I don't care if we have to do this, or that. He is not going to affect the game as a pass rusher. And as much as I hate that for TJ, because I think it's going to hurt his image to a lot of people and his numbers, it does really open things up on the other side of the field, where he's always lined up at the same spot. Defenses or offenses know exactly where he is. And as much as that frustrates me, it does make it really easy for the Steelers to go, okay, well, we know what they're going to do on the other side. We can play games on the other side here. We can do different things. But I do think on the flip side of that, using your best player creatively on defense is always going to be something I enjoy watching, right? I want to see TJ disrupt the play. I want to see him get sacks and force fumbles. And he still does that even because he just does it in the run game instead. But in general, I want to see them move him around more to take advantage of his skill set. But it's kind of hard to argue with the results for the most part, right? Like, it's working defensively. Yeah. So to me, I want to see them do a little bit more of that stuff. Maybe stand him up in front of a guard or a center, maybe flip sides sometimes. But even in the past, TJ's kind of said that he likes lining up there. Like, that's what he wants to do. And if he's comfortable with that, and he understands, like, hey, I'm not going to maybe get the same numbers, I'm not going to have the same impact in terms of statistically, then so be it, I guess.
Yeah, it is an interesting predicament that they're in, because Watt is drawing so much attention that it offers favorable matchups to everybody else. But guys across the defensive line, certainly the right edge over there, whether that's Highsmith or Herbig. Obviously, it doesn't work as well when you got Jeremiah Moon out there and you don't have Highsmith or Herbig
that
available to you.
Work then. Yeah, then you definitely need to do some different things. But
what it comes down to, Shayne, and everybody knows this, but your entire defense is built around TJ Watt and his ability to stay healthy and on the field. If he can stay out there, even if he's not the one producing, it's going to produce results for the defense because everybody's going to be better for the attention that he's drawing. And I'm glad that they finally have this chip stat out there that you can see that, yes, technically a double team is when you have to engage with 2 offensive linemen for at least 0.4 seconds. A chip, though, is what happens to TJ Watt all the time. And it's been happening to him for years now. It's a way to get him off his rush a little off balance there, and to offer some help on him to slow him down before he gets to the offensive tackle. And then from there, try to get to the quarterback. And so obviously he's going to be less effective, and he's been less effective as a pass rusher, but it's because he's drawing all that attention. I still think it was another solid game from him. He didn't have the 2 punch out forced fumbles like he did against the Raiders prior. But he's just a good football player that deserves a lot of attention. The guy we need to talk about, though, Shayne, is Beanie Bishop. 2 interceptions. I've been the biggest Beanie Bishop critic, and I don't apologize for that, because I think that he's kind of sucked in coverage the first 6 weeks of the season.
Yeah.
He turned it around here, though. Anytime you get 2 interceptions, I can ignore the fact that he gave up 4 catches for 35 yards in this game. I do not care about that at all. If you're getting 2 picks, you had a good game. You did your part, and your benefit to the defense was substantial. And that's what he did in this game. Both of them came on Garrett Wilson. The first was an amazing, which
unbelievable
left hand struck the ball right away. Yeah. And the second one, a little bit more fortunate, bounced off of Wilson's chest plate, but he was there to make the play. And then he returned it back to the 1 yard line, nearly had the pick 6 on the play. Yeah. Very, very pleased to see that breakout performance from Bishop. Is it something that's sustainable? I don't know. Turnovers never really are, but it's certainly a step in the right direction.
I do think that his game overall was really good, picks or not. I think he was much better this game than he's been in previous weeks. However, the picks do matter for a defense that relies on big plays, because let's be honest, like, down to down consistency is not always there with this team for a multitude of reasons. However, they always seem to find a way, especially in games that are important, to find a way to make a big play, whether it's a TJ forced fumble or a sack or an interception by somebody. They find ways to do this, and Beanie now adds his name to the list of guys who can do that, right? The first pick, like you talked about, unbelievable play. Like, if you look at some of the freeze frames of before the ball is thrown, and then you tell people, hey, there was an interception on this play by the guy that's turned the wrong way, everyone's going to be like, what are you talking about, right? But no, he flipped his hips, he got around his incredible play. And the second one, he almost admittedly did just straight up break up the pass before he had the interception when it bounced off of him. So it was still a solid effort. And then he gets paid off with the interception and takes it back. So overall, awesome performance. And I think what this means moving forward for him is hopefully his confidence is up. Because I think that's something that's super important for a player that's an undrafted player trying to make his way in the league as a rookie. Having the confidence to go, okay, I can play at this level. I just made 2 huge plays for my team. Maybe that will help get the consistency down up a little bit, and maybe make it not so important that Cam Sutton's able to play when he comes back and play well. Maybe you won't have to rely on him to come in and save the day if Bishop is playing well.
Yeah, and at the very least, Shayne, if nothing else, it's nice to know that he's got some ball skills there.
Yes,
so
yes.
Even if he's giving up some catches, quarterbacks are going to know that. He's just coming off a 2-interception game. Maybe they'll be a little bit more threatened to go his way, saying, yeah, this guy is able to take the ball away at the very least. And so you can't pick on him. We've seen him be picked on. I think before this game, he allowed a 125 passer rating on the season. That obviously changed when you get 2 picks in a game. I think he only allowed a 31 passer rating against Aaron Rodgers. And so encouraging sight to see. And Shayne, another player I wanted to mention was Keanu Benton. Quietly had himself a really good game. I mean, the guy just gets pressure. And what's amazing to me is that 7 games into Benton's second season, he has just 1 career sack. But he is, again, you want to talk about not being a box checker. Like if you only check the box score, you would think that Benton is just like some scrub rotational player. That's not him. Like he's a really solid football player. I think could already argue he's one of the top 15 or 20 interior defensive linemen in the league, partially because there's just not a lot of good interior defenders right now in the NFL, but he's very encouraging from what he offers from a pass rush standpoint, from a big guy in the middle, mostly playing zero tech. And so for him to only have 1 sack is really surprising considering the amount of pressure he can get on the quarterback.
He's just very disruptive. And I think that that's the key thing with him is he's disruptive in every way. Now, the run defense sometimes is not ideal, and which is probably why he doesn't play as many snaps as maybe I'd like him to play. But still, I understand that element of things. But yeah, I think if this guy can play 3 tech later on in his career at some point, like I'm begging the Steelers to make a nose tackle investment, not even for the linebackers help, because I think it would help them a lot too. We have people always saying that in the chat, I know, but like just as allowing him to play 3 tech, because everyone knows that's what his position is. I think the Steelers know that too. They just don't have the ability to play him there as much as they would like to. So he's going to eventually get some more production. But I think people who watched games, which unfortunately seems to be less and less people who have opinions on players, they know how disruptive he can be. This is one of those guys that has truly special ability to rush the passer compared to a lot of his peers. And I do think, like I said, that production will eventually show up for him.
Yeah, and they're just kind of in an odd situation with having the 3-4 front there when they're in base. And somebody's got to play zero tech. It's not going to be Ogunjobi. Like that's not his game at all. Benton was kind of the guy that got pigeonholed into it. And honestly, who would be the best one is Cam Hayward, because the guy can chew gap and he is strong. But they're not going to move Cam out of the position he's played.
They also don't want to have him be double teamed all the time, because it's going to wear him down more. Like it makes. I understand why they're doing. I really do. It's just more of a like, man, I'd love to see what it would look like if they had like a 340 pounder and they're just eating up blocks and let Hayward and Benton go after it. But we'll see.
Well, we're going to talk about Dexter Lawrence later.
Yeah,
and that is the best in the league to do it. And so, anybody else you want to get to on defense, Shayne?
Not really too much. I mean, I think the team played pretty well. Rodgers just looked old, frankly. I don't think they have much to look forward to, unfortunately, despite the Devontae Adams trade. I did want to get a couple chats in here before I move on. This one just came in from, of course, R Barley 18, one of our friends here. Unpopular opinion: we just talked about Cam should be playing zero tech and Benton Cam spot. I don't think that's unpopular so much as it is like it's something that I don't think the Steelers are willing to do, like we just said. I think that they're like, let's not make Cam do that at 35 as much as it might make sense. I think they'd rather just keep things as they are. And then this one's interesting because I actually would like this a lot. That he was responding to someone else in the chat that he heard a name to watch is Bo Melton of the Packers, which they are about as deep as it gets receiver room wise. And he's probably one of the guys they could afford to move. Now, why they would and what they'd want is up for debate, obviously. But that one would be interesting because he has made some big plays for them over the past 2 years.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the Packers got a lot of youth,
a lot of depth
on their receiving core. And so would they want to, knowing that they're competitive. They're a Super
maybe
Bowl
not.
caliber team if Jordan Love keeps playing that way. But I mean, that's up for grabs potentially there. Let's talk about special teams, Shane, and we have stuff to talk about today.
Yeah.
What a bogus leveraging call. I don't know. Minka, I feel like Minka is the only guy in the league that gets called for that. And I don't know what it is. Yes, he waved his arms back. Yes, he touched a player. He did not forcefully spring off of the player that he touched. And so it's very easy to see. I mean, the replay official called it and they agreed that should not have been a penalty. But guess what? That essentially took put 2 points back on the board, because even though it was an extra point try,
they went for 2.
Jets go for 2. They punch in the 2-point conversion. And so, I mean, it's nitpicky. At the end of the game, it's whatever, but it would have been a 37 to 13 game instead of 37 to 15 game. You hate to see those, because in the moment you're like, this is a big play. Like, we're early in the game here. Yeah, it does matter. And so they're just the officials messing something up like that. Like you wish that there was instant replay that can help you and be like, no, you got that wrong. That was nothing.
You'd love that, but special teams, man, that Steelers, there's times where the coverage units aren't necessarily the best. There's times in the past where the return units haven't been the best. But man, this team just blocks kicks. They love nothing more than just absolutely destroying the confidence of punters and kickers around the league every time they play them. They really try their best to come up with ways to do it. And it cracked me up when they just swarmed Danny Smith. And they were just like, they love that guy, and they should. Obviously, it's funny dude. But man, this special teams unit, like, it can change games. You look at, and I don't want to go on too much of a tangent here. We have plenty to talk about, but you look at some of the teams across the league that have gone really far in the playoffs, and some of them, they end up losing out on chances to go to the Super Bowl even because of their special teams. Look at the Packers a couple of years ago, where they were just making mistake after mistake in the playoffs and special teams and things like that. Like, this can matter. Like, think of a playoff situation where we need a blocked kick. Do you want anyone else's special teams unit except for the Steelers in that situation? No, you don't. Like, that does matter ultimately, potentially. So obviously you hope that we don't have the call go against us like it did for Minka. But the point is that this is a unit that teams have to take seriously. This isn't just like, oh, we'll go out there, kick the ball, we're good. You have to always wonder if they're going to find a way to get in there and block the kick.
Yeah, you do. You love that about them. And if they're not going to be a team that's able to return the ball because you're just not kicking to them, or Cordell Patterson isn't playing, whatever, you can contribute here. And this is a way to leave your mark on special teams. Minka should have gotten credit for that one. Dean Lowry blocked the other one. Isaiah Loudermilk blocked one this year. And so they get their hands up and they have a chance to do that. And it makes you wonder how it gives you a chance. Like, if it comes down to a game-winning field goal situation, somebody's kicking from 55-yarder, they can't put as much air on it. Like, get those mitts up there, because anything can happen. The Steelers have showed that 3 times already this season. Anything else you want to get to on special teams, Shane?
Special teams, no. I did want to address something real quick, chat-wise, from PVH here on YouTube. Do y'all think Kupp could have a connection with Russ like Tyler Lockett had? We're going to be talking about Cooper Kupp a lot here shortly, so stay tuned for that. Just wanted to address that one here. So.
All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you would like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. We've got 40 here in the live chat. Thanks for joining us here. If you have any questions for us, please drop them in the chat, and we would love to be able to get to those for you. All right, Shane. Is Russell Wilson the answer? That's the big question. That's what everybody wants to know.
Yeah.
And you and I, and again, let me start by this. Russell made us eat hey, how about this pun? Russell made us eat crow. Russell crow. So dad joke of the day. He made us eat some crow this week with our words. Now, you and I were Russell Wilson critics. I'm not going to go as far to say that, yes, he's clearly the best answer that this team has. But that second half performance was exactly what I had hoped to see if Mike Tomlin was willing to go against apparently what some people thought in the organization and make this move on his own, essentially. The second half was great. The first half, not so much, which is to be expected. He's missed a lot of time, had the calf injury, hardly practiced and played with his teammates all through the summer. So considering how the game progressed and what he was able to do in the second half, very pleased by this. At the same time, Shane, and I don't want to be this guy, but you could look at 2 plays in particular in this game and say, if those don't go Russell's way, what is the narrative right now? And those plays were the first moon ball down the sideline. Not a bad, it was really good pass by Russell Wilson. It was just a better catch by George Pickens, getting grabbed from the opposite shoulder pad, makes a one-handed catch on the sidelines, nearly out of bounds. That was the first one. The second one was the underthrown ball down the right sideline, bounced off a defender's shoulder pad. Pickens collects it, gets knocked out, recollects it again, and lunges forward. That was a tremendous play by Pickens and not so great of a pass, though it was nice that Wilson gave him the opportunity. That's what you have to do with these type of receivers. If you take that 80, 90 yards off the board right there, 2 fewer completions, we might have a little bit of a different narrative, and maybe one of those drives doesn't result in a touchdown. I don't want to do the if this, then that, but I mean, those were 2 amazing Pickens plays that kind of could have changed things a little bit.
And I think that's the key thing with this discussion is I'm not going to sit here and say that I think Russell Wilson was a bad player in this game, right? But if we're grading his specific debut against the Jets, it's not nearly as high of a grade for me as the offense against the Jets. And I think that's the key distinction here. And I wrote about it in an article about like what the key to keeping this going is. And it's the aggressiveness that they played with and that Russell played with. As much as it was a lot of stuff that I don't think is repeatable, the aggression and the willingness to attack downfield and make big plays is what this offense hasn't been doing with Fields. And whether it's Fields not doing it himself or if it's the coaching staff not trusting him to do it, I think it's a little bit of both, but mostly the staff not allowing him to play that way. That was holding the offense back a little bit because when you don't have a lot of playmakers, you have to use the ones you have to great effect, and they weren't really doing that in recent weeks. My problem with it, again, is that I think his debut, to me, on an individual perspective, is like a C grade for me. He made some big plays, but a lot of them were his teammates really picking him up and helping him out in those situations. But you also have to give him credit, like I said, for even allowing those plays to happen by taking those chances. So I think if you're the coaching staff, if you're going to play this way every week, if you're going to have this aggressiveness every week, the offense probably will be better week to week than it was under Fields. The problem is there's going to be times where that aggressiveness bites you or that aggressiveness just doesn't pay off. And then what do? Can Wilson do enough stuff outside of that Fields couldn't do for you to make it worth it for him to be out there most times? That's what I'm still not confident about.
Yeah, Shayne, I think that's really well said. And that's kind of where my thought was going as well, that it was a better team offensive performance than it was just an individual killer performance from Russell Wilson. There were some missed opportunities. He's not the player escaping the pocket like Justin Fields. We knew he wouldn't be. But when he did have to throw on the move, he dirted some of those balls. Like there was one where George Pickens got open in the left corner of the end zone, and he just spiked the ball in the dirt. Just couldn't get the pass out where he wanted it to be. There was another on a screen pass that was badly missed. And I give him some grace because of all the time that he missed there.
Yeah,
it wasn't a perfect performance. The second half, obviously much better than the first half. But you alluded to it. His best trait in this game was his willingness to throw the ball down the field. Not that he was perfectly accurate doing so, but it's nice to see him kind of make those big plays and at least take those shots and give his top receiver a chance to come down with the ball, which he ended up doing for 111 yards and a touchdown in this game. So they ended up seeing the fruits of that in their offense. Some of it was made easy for them, like when Bishop returned the ball to the 1 yard line. That was an easy touchdown for the Steelers. But we've seen that. I mean, it was not that dissimilar from what we saw in the Raiders game where the defense put them in advantageous situations as well. But if I had to give a grade to Wilson, I would say this is a solid B performance for Wilson in my book. I think it's an overall A team offensive performance, thanks to Najee, thanks to the holes the offensive line created, thanks to Pickens's spectacular catches in this game. But it could have been far worse. And I actually expected it to be far worse for Wilson because of all the rust that he needed to knock off. I would have assumed that this game he did it quickly and it was gone by late in the second quarter. And then it shows the projection moving forward that, maybe this is going to have a chance to work. Now, Shayne, our argument, and I want to make this clear for anybody listening to the first time, because we talked about this last week. We disapproved of the decision to move on from Justin Fields and to start Russell Wilson. For me, Shayne, it was never about, I think Justin Fields is tiers above Wilson. That's not where my head was. My head was Justin Fields is 25 years old. Russell Wilson turns 36 years old in a couple of weeks here in November. And I just didn't see a hope of a future. And so now that you've made this switch to Wilson, you've got one of the oldest quarterbacks in the league. And so this is it. I mean, it's true. Like you have to find a way to make a deep playoff push and try to compete for a Super Bowl this year, because you don't have a hope for a future with Russell Wilson. You just do not, because of his age. And I kind of don't care about what he does this year, because when you go into, he's going to be 36 during the offseason. He turns 37 years old next season. Even if the Steelers give him a contract, what can we expect from this guy? The time to capitalize is now. TJ Watt's 30. Cam Hayward is 35. This is why we're going to talk about trading for a receiver here in a second. But before we do that, let's talk about where Wilson must improve the most moving forward. Shayne, I'll let you go first, and I've got an idea.
I think for me, the thing that he has to improve the most, especially because of another point I'll bring up, is his accuracy. He was not an accurate quarterback in this game for the most part. And even the couple times it wasn't anything that was spectacular. Like even the moon ball to Pickens, it's not that so much I think it's a bad throw. I think it's the throw that is truly like, I'm throwing it up there, you go figure out the rest. This is not an accurate pass so much as it is a decision to throw the ball in the direction of George Pickens, right? And that's great that it worked, but that's not going to always happen, even with George. It just isn't, right? So he has to find a way to become more accurate on the easier things. And a lot of that could improve just with playing more, obviously, but he hasn't been as accurate as he used to be the past couple of years. Like I think his arm is deteriorating a little bit. And that's my other point, and this is something I don't know if he can improve at all, but his arm simply just isn't good. Like his arm talent is no longer what it used to be with the Seahawks, where he can rifle throws in at a high level. He's not going to hit a lot of throws that are going to be high difficulty. A lot of the big plays are going to have to come on, like you said, the lofting touch throws down the field. And those work, obviously, and they're great to have in your arsenal. But there's going to be some throws that Fields can make that Wilson simply can't. Like that's just the reality of the situation at this point. And again, they're going to work around that. I think they understand that about him, and I think he mostly understands that about himself. But it does limit some of the stuff you're able to do. And again, I don't think that's going to improve over time.
Shayne, I'm glad you brought that up, because I noticed that on film as well. It's not surprising to see a quarterback,
an older quarterback
in their old age, but arm talent is more than just arm strength.
Yes.
There's strength, there's velocity, there's ability to throw from different arm angles, there's ability to throw on the run. It's a collection of things. And so with Wilson, in my mind, Shayne, and you can tell me if I'm wrong here, I think Wilson still has arm strength, but he does not have the velocity that he once did. He can't drive those throws.
Can't drive
like he used to. And I'll give you another example, one that you're all very familiar with, I'm sure. Mason Rudolph has arm strength. He can throw the ball 60 yards. He just can't drive it on a rope in like a 25-yard out corner route. So there's a difference between being able to put that ball on a frozen rope like that, or be able to throw a moon ball down the field. Like those are two very different skill sets there. And Wilson doesn't have the ability to drive that ball. I think that's what we're seeing. And where I would say, Shayne, outside of that, where he needs to improve the most is he does got to get better again throwing on the run. It's not going to be something he's going to ask to do as much as Fields.
No.
But every time he did not set his feet in this game, bad things happened. Like he was spiking the ball into the dirt. Passes were very inaccurate. They came up short. Yes, there were a couple that they should have been able to have, even low passes like the one to Calvin Austin on that third down, let it slip through his arms and complete the process. But he's got to get better throwing on the run again, because he's not going to be able to just stand back in the pocket and set his feet every time he throws, especially in an offense that has RPOs and when you're doing PA boots and you're going to be throwing on the run. So I think that's where he needs to improve the most. Let's talk about expectations for Russell Wilson, Shayne. Now that Wilson is a starter, and obviously you scored 37 points, you're about to go up against the Giants, you're going to have your bye week. This isn't changing anytime soon. Like it would have to be some things would have to go terribly wrong, I think, for the Steelers to revert back to Justin Fields, regardless of how we feel about that, regardless of how he plays in the next couple of games. It's going to take more than that. Yeah. Knowing that Wilson is the guy that Mike Tomlin wants, is the guy that is going to be at the helm here for the Steelers, what are your expectations for the rest of the season and him in particular?
I think my expectations of what will happen is that he will regress pretty significantly from this performance in terms of points scored offensively. But we settle into a slightly better offense in terms of points and yards because of the aggressiveness that they're asking him to play with and that he's willing to play with. Like, and that's where this comes in, where like technically for the rest of this year, maybe from the beginning, if they were going to allow him to do the things he's doing, checking out of plays, audibling, moving stuff around, trying to do everything possible to get in the right play, and then be aggressive with it, that is a better version of the offense, even with Fields in there and what he can do as a runner. My problem with it still is that I would just rather them try and see if Fields can do those same things and let it happen. And then if it doesn't work, that's why you have Russell Wilson on the team. Instead, they kind of coddled Fields, which helped him develop a little bit as a passer, but it allowed him also to show that, like, maybe we're not going to get the aggressiveness or the big plays that he's able to produce. So my expectations in terms of what's actually going to happen is that, and then what I expect him to do personally, just remain aggressive. Like, you have to play the way you did against the Jets all year and let the cards fall where they may. There's going to be some ugly weeks, I think, if you play this way, because if the big plays don't happen, can you do enough of the little stuff nowadays? I don't know. But if you play like this every week, if you have this mentality every week, it should lead to more points.
Yeah, and if the passing game is efficient, if Wilson is firing, that is more important than the rushing ability that you get out of Fields. It's just, do we trust this to continue? Is he going to progress from here, or is he going to get worse? And I think that's the question everybody's waiting to see. I kind of think that we're going to see much of the same. I mean, I think we're going to see some up and down performances. We're going to see some spotty throws. I don't think we'll always see the most accurate throws down the field. I hope that it improves from here. But like we said, this discussion was never about believing that one quarterback was necessarily tiers above the other. It was just which one gives you a hope of a future. And I didn't think that either were franchise quarterbacks, but Justin Fields, being 25 years old, getting progressively better throughout his career, albeit at a fairly slow pace, he at least gave you a glimmer of hope to say maybe this guy could turn it around by the end of the season, perform well, just explode in the playoffs, or whether it's rushing the ball, making a few big plays down the field, whatever, and then give you hope that he could be that quarterback in 2025. We don't have that with Russell Wilson, in my opinion, because of the age, unless things just go awesome this year and he shows he still has the arm available to him. I think realistically what we're looking at, Shayne, is a scenario where the Steelers are going to be in the quarterback market here again pretty soon, as early as next offseason. But that's why they have to try to find a way to make this work right now. So let's talk about some Steelers wide receiver trade rumors, because there is so much truth to the stuff that you're hearing out there. We know for a fact that the Steelers have been interested in acquiring a wide receiver. They've talked to the Jets. They've talked to the 49ers. They had a deal on the table for Brandon Ayuk before the rug was pulled out from under them. There's no doubt that they're interested in trading for a receiver. I think that has been made perfectly clear. And Omar Khan would probably even tell you that flat out at this point. They've not made any efforts to hide that. They've just been unsuccessful. They lost out to the Jets because that was Adams' preferred destination. The Jets offered what the Steelers could not. The 49ers ended up inking to Ayuk to a contract extension. They weren't going to get Amari Cooper because the Browns weren't going to trade him in division. And so these guys that have been traded here, the Steelers, they've inquired about them, but they haven't been successful. Maybe they will be now. And Shayne, I kind of fully expect something to happen before the deadline. I don't know what or to what magnitude, but I think something's going to happen here. The big name, obviously, the last big name out there remaining is Cooper Kupp. And I think we talked really early in the show how DeAndre Hopkins going to the Chiefs may have actually increased the chances of the Steelers being able to land a player like Kupp, because now the Chiefs got their guy. They are probably at least somewhat content at the position. I don't know if they're going to go trade for another receiver, even though they could stand to do so, because the room is that bad.
If they can.
But knowing they went out and got Hopkins already, he'll be part of their offense. The Steelers' odds boosted way up. I believe they went from plus 300, if I recall the number off the top of my head, to minus 125 odds to land Cooper Kupp. They're the odds-on favorites to do so. It makes sense why. The Steelers are a good organization. And of the other names mentioned on that list, Shayne, I've got that pulled up in front of me right here. This is from Sports Betting AG. The Chargers, who are, again, could be a playoff team, but they're wavering right now. The Buccaneers, which would make sense for them because they just lost.
Injuries to receivers.
Godwin for the year.
Will they trade into a team that could be a problem for them in the future, though? I don't know.
That's the question as well. The Lions, I mean, talk about overkill. If he went to the Lions plus 700 odds, so significantly worse than Steelers, but I mean, you talk about an overkill situation. There's your St. Brown insurance right there if you're Detroit.
At that point, pretty much, yeah.
And then it's like Falcons, Commanders, Bills already traded for a receiver. It makes sense as to why the Steelers are a 5-2 football team. They are in the thick of it. They are potentially a receiver away from taking the next step up at an offense, not being an elite offense, but at least taking the next step up. They've already got a top 3 defense in the NFL collectively when you average out all of their statistics, points allowed, yards allowed, DVOA, EPA. This team collectively is a pretty solid team this year. And now you've got some hope with what Russell Wilson was just able to offer you. My thought process on this, Shayne, is go big or go home. Like at this point, like you gotta capitalize on windows. And not that I believe that this team is going to win a Super Bowl right now, but your quarterback's 36. The best player in your team is 30. Cam Hayward, the second best player in your team, is 35. Like you might as well try to make this work right now. So reportedly the Rams are asking for a 2nd-round pick for Kupp. I don't believe that they will get that, considering that he's 31 years old and he does have an injury history. He has not been able to stay healthy these last couple years. But this is potentially, if he can stay healthy, a potentially needle-moving type receiver because of how good of a route runner he is. He's 6'2". He's very physical after the catch. He's a yards after the catch type of guy, and he's a quarterback's best friend. Like I can see a scenario where this works out pretty well in their favor, not to mention the jump between Van Jefferson and Cooper Kupp is astronomical still.
Yeah, just ask the Rams about that.
Yes, they know firsthand. They've had both of those guys. So, Shayne, what are your thoughts on the whole Cooper Kupp situation here?
I think he's the perfect fit for what the Steelers need from a skill set perspective and from what they're trying to do offensively. Because you look at him not just as an unbelievable route runner and a really crafty player and a player that is going to be available and open to Wilson when he's healthy, right? Like this is a guy that can be that safety blanket that we'd all kind of like maybe Freiermuth to be, but that's beside the point. But that's what he is at this point, what he's always been, just maybe not to the same level he was when he was, basically the best player in the sport at the position for a while there, but he can do a lot of those things that he's always done. And he's a great blocker. I think that's an underrated element of this because we've kind of pigeonholed Van Jefferson into being a blocker. Hasn't always worked out. But Kupp is legitimately one of the best blockers in the sport at the position. As much as maybe you'd like him to not do it as much now with the injuries, he would present a huge boost on offense for both blocking and as a pass receiver.
Yeah, and of the realistic options remaining, I think that he is the best of the group, the one that makes a lot of sense for the group. There's been people messaging me on Twitter saying, hey, Steelers don't need another slot receiver. I understand that he plays a slot a lot. He's also can be a Z. You can move him around the formation. He's just not good at everything he does.
Player. He's not a slot-only player.
If you play him on the outside, he'll be way better than Van Jefferson. So you can use him however you need to use him. The bar is so low. It is so low in Pittsburgh right now. And surely Van Jefferson is not the second best receiver on this team right now. It's Calvin Austin. But Austin is just so small that it's hard to get him the ball consistently. And because of that, I don't think he's an unnatural receiver, but because he's 5'7" and 3/4, 170 pounds, you almost have to treat him like a gadget because you can't get him the ball routinely. And so that's the issue that they're having right now. Shayne, do you think the Steelers will trade for a receiver before the deadline? And that is coming up in we're under 2 weeks away from now. So do you think that's going to happen?
I do think they do trade for a receiver. I do think, though, as well, that it's probably, given this team's history, even with Omar Khan maybe being a little bit different, we've seen him try to go out and get some big fish in terms of receivers, just not successful. I have a feeling it's going to end up being one of the guys that isn't super, that isn't going to be a super exciting ad, like a Mike Williams or someone of that nature. Bo Melton's name was brought up earlier in the chat. Like somebody like that that's like, it's better to have them than not when you're looking at this receiver core. I mean, there's not many guys who I wouldn't take right now that are actually playing somewhat. But I do worry that Kupp isn't going to be the one that ultimately gets traded to them, maybe because he just doesn't get traded. I think that that's still something that's possible, right? I think it kind of matters how the next week or so goes.
Yeah, I think it would take appeasing Sean McVay, who loves Cooper Kupp, and making that right move. And so let's go through some of these teams, Shayne, that are essentially out of it. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they're not coming back. into this playoff hunt here, and what receiver options could be available. Some respectable and some not so much. Let's start with the AFC East here. The Jets 2-5. Mike Williams is the obvious name.
He's the obvious one.
He's the odd man out there. Came and beat out Alan Lazard, which kind of tells you where he is right now in the pecking order in New York. I'm not the biggest Mike Williams fan. I kind of think that he's toast at this point. He just doesn't have a lot of juice left. To me, Shayne, how I compare this to give you the Steelers comparison here, he's Allen Robinson plus. Like he's going to do what Robinson did last year, but a little bit more than that, and mostly from the outside, probably instead of the slot. But very similar players. I mean, Robinson was really an outside receiver for most of his career, and guy that didn't create a ton of separation, just like Mike Williams doesn't. He's got to win in contested situations, and I just don't think that's a formula for success right now. I don't think it's the type of player that they need, one that doesn't have a lot left in the tank after that ACL injury. And my goodness, I mean, if you were the fourth receiver on the Jets and you're not getting involved, it does make you wonder, like, how effective is he going to be in Pittsburgh? So that's one there. The Patriots, Shayne, they're not going to get rid of Jalen Polk, who they just drafted. Kendrick Bourne, an option maybe, but like that's not a needle mover at all to me. It's like I don't want the Patriots leftovers.
Yeah, let's just assume the Patriots don't need to send us anybody because they have to keep everybody that can live and breathe as a receiver for May of this year anyway. So
they would be wise to do that. You don't want to jeopardize the situation of your young quarterback. So if they get injuries there, they want to make sure that May is still performing well. You go down to the AFC West, and Chargers aren't giving up anybody. They're still firmly in the race at 3-3. I mean, they would be a playoff.
I also don't really want anybody that may be available.
No, I agreed with that. They're in the same boat where maybe they should be looking to trade for a receiver. They didn't miss on Joe Alt, but man, they could have had some of those receivers in an excellent wide receiver class too. That's something they could be looking at. The Raiders, just not a lot going on for them. They've already traded Adams. I don't know if they're going to want to part with anybody else.
I would take Myers off their hands, but I think
Myers would be a significant upgrade for sure.
The problem is just that they still need somebody other than Brock Bowers to throw to, and like Trey Tucker, as good as he's been at times, I don't think they want him to be wide receiver one. That's kind of a lot to ask of him, I think. So yeah, as much as I'd like Myers, maybe that's about it. So.
Yeah, we'll brush over the AFC North. The Browns already traded a Cooper. They're not going to trade anybody to the Steelers. As bad as they might want to be this year, I don't know. The Titans already traded a receiver away, although I could have seen like a Treylon Burks potentially. Yeah, I don't know if they're going to want to jeopardize that any further now. We move over to the NFC here. The Giants 2-5. They don't need a Wan'Dale Robinson type. That's much of the same that they have a slot receiver. Darius Slayton.
I like Darius Slayton. I would like Darius Slayton. Now, the thing is, obviously, we're about to play them this week. I think maybe if they lose that game handily to us, maybe they get on the phone and say, hey, would you like Darius Slayton as a second reward for beating us, maybe? I would take that because I think he's just a different skill set than what we have. We don't have a true deep threat that isn't 5'7", as much as I like Austin, like we talked about. So I would be fine with that. But again, like not probably going to move the needle a ton ultimately.
Yeah, and I would imagine that you can get him relatively cheap. The Giants would be 2-6 if they lost this game.
Yeah.
They would probably just be willing to kind of stockpile capital. I'm sure they don't believe in Daniel Jones as their future anyway. So probably you can't ruin him. He's already been ruined. So
yeah.
Let's look at the NFC West here. The Rams are that team we talked about. Cooper Kupp would be the guy. They're not getting rid of Puka, obviously, and I don't think anybody else. Whittington. Tutu Atwell, none of those guys are needle movers.
We already have Tutu Atwell lights. So
we already have him. His name is Calvin Austin. Yeah. NFC North, everybody's doing well in that.
Everybody's too good to. This is revisit later.
Yes, the Bears are last in that division at 4-2. And Caleb Williams, they wouldn't want to get rid of any of his options.
No, so maybe a Packers receiver like we talked about, just because they have so many, but they probably are just like, no, we're not going to mess with it. So,
agreed. NFC South, Falcons and Bucks are both in the playoff race. The Saints are getting down there, and one more loss would bury them. I think they might be on their. Are they on their bye this week though?
I think maybe, but also all their receivers are either hurt.
Yeah, Shaheed's out for the season. So here's one. I want to see what you think about this.
Okay.
Are the Saints in a bad enough way, Shayne, that they would be willing to trade Chris Olave for a blockbuster Minkah Fitzpatrick level first-round pick? Trade.
They just extended Alvin Kamara, so I think the Saints still think they're good.
Got old running back.
I really think they still think they're good. I think the thing about the
that
Saints,
one would intrigue me though.
Yeah, it would, but I think that the Saints truly are incapable of believing they're out of it. I really think that they're still building this thing up to go for it again next year, despite the can that they're kicking down the road basically being like it's probably about this big at this point. It's just I don't believe the Saints want to trade anybody. I think they want to just extend and restructure and cut and whatever they got to do to get under the cap, but make the team as good as it can be under those circumstances. So I would say probably not, unfortunately.
Highly unlikely.
No,
would you be in favor of that first round pick for Chris Olave?
The thing is
you get the rest of this season and one more year on his rookie deal,
right?
And the 5th-year option, and you can extend him after that if things go south with Pickens.
I think it's enticing. I think if you told me that the Steelers are absolutely going to use a first-round pick on a receiver if they don't make that trade, then I might be willing to say yes right away because I don't expect a better receiver than Chris Olave to necessarily be available. But I also feel like the Steelers are just going to try to take a receiver in like the second round next year again and just do what they always do. Be like, this guy's either going to be awesome or he's going to be a head case and also awesome. So it's like, whatever, we'll figure it out. I don't know. So I get the thought process though, because he is a true like that would be the Deontay Johnson plus replacement, right? Like that skill set, but plussed up a little bit. So.
Yeah, and then from the Saints' perspective, I mean, if I was a Saints fan, they don't have that many chips to begin with that are worth building around, and so they're not going to want to.
I don't think so either.
No. Just some fuel for thought there. And then the last one, Shayne, the Carolina Panthers, the 1-6 Panthers, they are toast. This is a horrible franchise. Deontay Johnson, that ship.
Yeah. Okay. Never mind. Okay.
The other one would be Jonathan Mingo, though. Like,
buy low on him. Maybe buy low on him because he's had a rough go of it in Carolina. Maybe see if it's just because it's Carolina. I liked him coming out of Ole Miss. Like, I think that he has talent. He has some juice, but again, like it's a guy that like theoretically would probably be an upgrade because he is athletic and not Van Jefferson, but I don't know if it translates to this season, right? So I don't know if it's something that's going to really impact things this year. Could be a nice future add if he ends up figuring it out, but the options are just there's just not a lot because most of the teams that have receivers that might be a good fit for us are just good enough to probably stand pat. It's really kind of the Rams with Kupp if they want to do that, and some other teams that have some scraps for us to grab.
Yeah, that's really it. I mean, and the only other one from the Panthers would be Adam Thielen, and
But that's just like left. That's just really sad if you're talking about Cooper Kupp being available though too. It's like, man, this was Cooper Kupp 6 years ago. Like, it's pretty much. Yes. I don't know.
So that's truly all the teams. Every other team that I didn't mention there. They're ones that they're in the running right now, or they either have a bye week coming up here, or we're not going to have enough time before the trade deadline for them to make a determination that they're going to be out of it.
Yeah.
So it truly is thin. This pool has really thinned out. Wasn't all that big to begin with, but Cooper Kupp is genuinely in a tier of his own, the best option. Especially. And the other name that I wanted to mention, I teased this out there earlier in the show when we had the DK Metcalf comment. Tyler Lockett and Russell Wilson would make so much sense together.
It would.
But because the Seahawks are technically leading that division right now, whether you think they're going to at the end of the season or not, I just can't see them parting with him. I think that they'd rather have the depth. They'd rather keep their offense good and not get rid of a chip like that. They could potentially help them in a playoff run. So that's it. It's Cooper Kupp or bust kind of at this point for the Steelers. The only other one, Shayne, would be, and I don't know how I missed this over here, but Christian Kirk.
Yeah,
the Jags are 2-5. Do they risk potentially taking a good weapon away from a Trevor Lawrence? Would they rather have draft capital for him next year, knowing that this team stinks? But I don't know what they do there. But Kirk would be kind of a pricier option as well.
Yeah, I don't hate it. I really don't. I think he's clearly much better than anybody we have outside of Pickens, but I do think he's a little bit more slot dependent than a Kupp would be or some of these other guys would be. And I do think that playing him on the outside may present some problems for him. So I think that it still would be an upgrade for sure. I think it would matter how much draft capital they expect back for him, right? Like I think that's what would matter. If it's anything more than like a 4th or 5th round pick, I don't think that
so. It would be.
I think for them to it to be worth it, I think probably too. Yeah. So
And that's kind of where I am with that one as well. I'd much rather have Kupp, I think, for Steelers situation than a trade for Christian Kirk. You can have Gabe Davis for nothing if you
I'm sure they'd love to get rid of that contract. It's not even that big of a contract.
Hey,
it's just
dumb teams do dumb things,
they
and
do.
they continue that vicious cycle. So
good for
all
Davis.
Right.
He made a lot of money off that one performance against the Chiefs. So good for him.
Yeah, he sure did. Shayne, that's about it in terms of trade targets go. So keep your eyes on that. I mean, it's not a story that's going away. The Steelers, like Shayne and I both predicted, the Steelers will make that move before the deadline. It just depends on who is it for. Is it going to be the last needle mover, which is Cooper Kupp, who could be still a really high end number 2 receiver if he's healthy, or is it going to be a guy that is nothing more than a slight upgrade over Van Jefferson?
We'll take him, but not probably going to matter a whole lot.
Yeah. All right, Shayne, let's preview the Steelers versus Giants Monday night football game in week 8 here. This will be the one and only Monday night game the Steelers play this season. This will also be the last time the Giants play a primetime game of any kind this year. The Steelers still have a Thursday night game coming up later in the season. But I talked about this a little bit first, Shayne, and I want to start with this before we get into the odds. TJ Watt, Dexter Lawrence. These are the 2 top players in Defensive Player of the Year odds, according to DraftKings Sportsbook. Right now, Watt is plus 100 to win the award. Dexter Lawrence plus 300. These odds could potentially change depending on the outcome of this game. First of all, if the Giants beat the Steelers in primetime, AP voters are going to see that. They're going to say, look at what just happened here. And if Dexter Lawrence wrecks the game and Watt does not, that could flip the odds entirely. And because they're close enough at this point, Dexter Lawrence has had a phenomenal season. It's hard to make sense of. At 342 pounds, this guy has 9 sacks in 7 games. What's so odd, though, Shayne, is the Giants' defense reeks, though. So do you give the award to a player on a bad defense, even if he's having like just this astronomically impressive season? How much does like the defensive ranking matter? And that's where TJ Watt is going to win heads and shoulders above Lawrence in that department, at least. But he's not going to have the production that Lawrence has unless things start turning around here soon.
Yeah, I think the problem for Lawrence, like you said, is that like they have, I believe, comfortably the most sacks in the NFL as a team. I'd have to go check back and see if that's changed after this past week, but I know they came into last week with the most sacks, and I think they had plenty of sacks in that game. So against the Eagles, so they are really good at getting after the quarterback. The problem is secondary has a lot of holes, and also the offense continually gives them bad positions to be in. I don't think this defense is so much bad as it is in a really hard spot to produce numbers in terms of points allowed and yards and things. I think that they're in a tough spot to be able to rank super highly in that. So I don't really hold it against Lawrence at all, but obviously voters are going to do that. We know that about them. Like that is going to matter. So I think if TJ has a really good game and can maybe actually get some pressure, because if there's any team currently that you're going to get pressure on, even if they send a bunch of resources at them, it's probably this Giants team. They're without Andrew Thomas. And I know he plays on the opposite side of Watt anyway, but this line was not – it was completely useless against the Eagles, like completely, utterly useless. They could do nothing.
Yeah.
And I think that our group is, comparable at least, obviously. Now, they have a little bit more overall depth and guys you can throw at the problem, but it's going to be a rough game for them to protect from Watt or Highsmith. So I can see our defense definitely has a much better chance of performing well, at least.
Yeah, and Shayne, speaking of Dexter Lawrence here, he – by himself, there's only so much he can do, right? Like he can't be responsible for a bad play in the secondary. I mean, that's like, who's your best player in the second? Andrew Phillips. Like it's a rough secondary right now, and so he can only be responsible for so much. But at the same time, we know how this voting goes. Like if you don't at least have a respectable defense, it's going to be hard to win the award. And so he would kind of be really going against the grain there in terms of a guy that could win if the Giants finish with a poorly ranked defense, and we'll see how the rest of the season goes for them. The Steelers are the opposite way though right now. Watt's not producing. He's only on the pace for 10, 11 sacks the entire year, which would be really low for TJ Watt. I mean, like half of what
very poor pressure numbers too for his standards.
Yeah, poor pressure numbers. And again, we already talked about the reason for that is getting chipped at an extremely high rate, higher than anybody else in the league. And he's not able to overcome those chips to get the pressures and sacks. But The Steelers have a really good team defense. So Shayne, what it would remind me of is 2019 when Stephon Gilmore was handed the DPOY award, just because he was the best player on a good Patriots defense.
Yeah.
Watt was clearly a better and more impactful player than Gilmore that year, in my opinion, at least. And he should have been given the award. And now maybe, and I don't want to be conspiracy theory here, but maybe Watt gets the award because it's like, hey, look, you finished top 4, or you finished top 3 in DPOY voting 4 times, and you only have 1 award. You could argue whether or not he was snubbed from Myles Garrett last year. I think he certainly was snubbed from the Stephon Gilmore award in 2019. So maybe it's kind of those, we're gonna give you one after the fact, even if your numbers aren't there this year. Like, I can see something like that happening. Don't tell anybody. We want him to be in that race, but I think it is going to take more statistical production. Like, he can't be on the paper. 10 sacks isn't going to do it.
They're going to have to figure out a way to get him open and get him more pressures and sacks. Like, even someone who understands why it's happening, at some point production matters. And we've talked about this. Like, the reason why we've vouched for Watt a lot of these years is because despite the fact that he gets so much attention, despite the fact that the Steelers defense kind of puts him at a disadvantage in terms of racking up numbers because of how they play him, he still was at the top of the league in all the statistical categories and also made impact plays, right? So, like, this year, it's not going to probably be quite that way where he's at the top of the league in pressures and sacks. Like, he's going to probably fall short of his career numbers typically in a full season, but the impact is still there. We may have a situation where a lot of the other top edge rushers aren't having elite seasons either, especially with Hutchinson now out for the season, unfortunately. And yeah, Dexter Lawrence, I'll be honest, if I was giving out the award tomorrow, it would be to him because with Hutchinson out, this dude, I mean, he's a nose tackle, Tommy. This is not normal.
It's crazy.
Like, over the past couple of years, he's had production from the nose tackle spot as a pass rusher that we have quite literally never seen happen in the history of the sport. It's just remarkable. So you can't really disregard him, even with a defense that isn't very good. But at the same time, can you give Defensive Player of the Year to a player who likely is going to finish on a bottom 8 team in the NFL? I just don't know if the voters are willing to do that, regardless of whether they should or not, right? So that's something that has to be factored in. And the fact that he's even this high in the race with the way the Giants are playing is testament to how much they respect him. You have to admit that too. So
100%. It's a worthwhile discussion. And like I said, and it brings us back to this game in particular, Steelers versus Giants on Monday Night Football. The performances in this game, and whether you like to think that the AP voters consider this or not, all eyes are on you when you play a primetime game. All eyes are on you. If the Steelers stick it to the Giants, if Watt has a 3-sack game this week and they can contain Lawrence to almost nothing, that's going to really shift the odds. Say the other way as well, though. If Giants keep the game close or even beat the Steelers in primetime and Watt is quiet, that'll flip it back the other way. So keep an eye on that. It's going to be one of the biggest storylines that isn't talked about really this game, or I don't project it to be, but we'll see if they end up mentioning that in the broadcast here. Let's talk about the odds here, Shayne. After back-to-back blowout wins, it's nice to say that, isn't it? Like back-to-back. Well, we don't get to say that.
Man, when was the last time that happened? I have to look it up. It's got to be a long time.
Well, did they do it last year, Cincinnati, and
I don't know. Seattle, I think that was close.
That was a shootout one. Yeah, it was a shootout, but it wasn't a blowout. So yeah, it's we don't get to do it very often. So.
Probably the season where they started 11-0, maybe.
I'm sure they had one then.
Yeah, probably then.
2020.
But yeah, it's probably been a bit. Yeah.
It's been a hot minute. So Steelers are 6.5-point favorites at home in Acrisure Stadium for Monday Night Football right now, according to DraftKings Sportsbook. These lines are obviously subject to change as we get closer to the game. Is this a fair line, though, Shayne, considering the Giants are coming off a 28-3 loss and the Steelers are coming off a 37-15 victory over the Jets?
It's definitely fair, but I don't like seeing a line like this for the Steelers. I'll just be honest with you. Maybe I'm being paranoid about the fact that they blow out 2 teams in a row and they're playing a bad team and Russell Wilson is making a second start. It does feel like under normal circumstances, this is one of those games where I would hammer the Steelers to lose because this is kind of one of those games they typically drop, right? Now, they've already done that twice this year, so maybe you could say, like, they kind of got out of their system. I don't know. I do think, though, admittedly, I don't know if the football gods will allow Daniel Jones to beat the Steelers in their place in a very important game. I don't think that's going to happen. So I do get the odds, but again, it just kind of freaks me out a little bit. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I can see. I mean, what are the chances they blow a team out 3 times in a row? Come on.
Blowout, yeah. Win, sure. Blowout, I don't know.
So I think the line is fair considering what we've seen.
It does
knowing
make
that
sense,
the Giants, I mean, they're backed into a corner right now. It's now and never for them. Not that they just necessarily have the talent to do it anyway, but they know that their season is basically riding on this game. You can't drop to 2-6 if they want to stay relevant. This is a must win for them. The Steelers probably just the odds tell you they're likely to come back down to earth after a 32 and a 37 point performance. And so, yeah, I think that's pretty fair overall. Let's talk injuries in this game. Obviously, the Steelers are going to be without Nick Herbig again, and that one's unfortunate because, boy, when you have that pass rush rotation of Watt, Highsmith, and Herbig, that is just lethal. And one of those guys is always fresh. And so can't wait to get that back after the bye week. Thankfully, Highsmith is back. He looked awesome against Tyron Smith this past week. And so that'll help out tremendously. Cordell Patterson, I think, is on track to play this week too. And we always record this again before the first official injury report comes out. So we're only going off right now is Mike Tomlin's comments from his Tuesday press conference. And that's all we have right now. What other injuries, Shayne? Anything else we got to address here?
I don't think so. I mean, we already mentioned Andrew Thomas is done for the season. Unfortunately for the Giants, that's a huge loss. Our guys, we already know kind of where their status is for the most part. It feels like the Steelers are getting healthier slightly, which is great. And the Giants, I don't know if it matters because the guys they've lost are guys that they kind of can't afford to lose. So it's already kind of a bad spot for them.
So let's bring this right full circle into these matchups then. You're going to get TJ Watt against Jermaine Illuminor. You're going to get Alex Highsmith against Joshua Ezeudu. How do you say that?
Ezeudu, I think, or Ezeudu. He's playing left tackle for them. I didn't realize that. That's hilarious. I believe he's normally
that is
guard.
Where, well, according to ESPN's depth chart, who knows? I mean, I'll have to dive in and see who's actually playing there, but that's who they have listed right now.
Okay.
Anytime you go to Andrew Thomas, though, to a swing tackle, you're in trouble. I mean, that's a huge drop off. So
it's not good.
We just saw, and I know Tyron Smith is not the same player anymore, but Highsmith whipped Tyron around the edge on 4 to 6 reps in that game. He took advantage of Watt drawing the attention, and he had true one-on-ones. He's going to get those again against the Giants. I expect nothing less. And he's going to take advantage of those as well. And so this is where you really wish you could say, all right, Herbig, you're going to come in third quarter and you're going to feast on Daniel Jones because Daniel Jones is prone to sacks, Shayne. This guy takes sacks.
He certainly does.
In the Eagles game, so.
Yeah, he certainly does. He's one of the things that's always been very funny to me about Daniel Jones is for whatever reason, right? He just kind of a lot of times acts like the pressure doesn't exist or that he can't be hit. And so he just acts like that's not a problem. And then all of a sudden he just gets annihilated and you're like, what happened? Like he's very oblivious in the pocket, which frankly is not always great. Sometimes it's great to stay in the pocket. Like he will make some plays because of it, but more often than not, it ends up in a bad play for them. So it's just not ideal, honestly. So
it is comical to me though. There's still teams out there that are willing to go like 5-6 years with a Daniel Jones type quarterback. I'm like, what are you seeing in this guy? You have to hit the reset button. You've got to move on. You bite the bullet and turn the page there. So that is my biggest fear, Shayne, that when Steelers go to draft a quarterback, it's why I was not a Kenny Pickett fan and all, you know that. But I was worried that if you get stuck in quarterback limbo, that is the worst place to be. I'd rather know that you busted right away and you can go and do it over again, because when you get stuck in quarterback limbo, there is no hope for you to actually be a competitive team. And that's where the Giants are right now. Doesn't mean they can't beat the Steelers. We're going to give our game predictions here in just a second. Other matchups in this game, Malik Neighbors, obviously he is a player, and even this early in his career, I mean, he can shred you. We've seen him do it already. I mean, he was on the pace to be Rookie of the Year, and then had the injury setback there. But that is a guy you absolutely have to account for, and I'm curious to see what the plan is there for the Steelers.
I can tell you what the plan should be. Will they do it? Probably not, because It's the Steelers. However, they should have Joey Porter in his face every single snap of the game
Mhm.
because against zone coverage, you might as well not even bother playing it against Malik Neighbors. That's how good he is at beating zone coverage.
Yeah.
Now, man coverage, on the other hand, not so much, especially in press man coverage. So I think that's where you can try to limit him a little bit because even going back to his college tape, one of his worst games against specifically it was Florida State, Renardo Green, who's now playing for the Niners. He gave him a lot of issues because of his aggressive physical style as a press man corner. That's where you can win because when you give him a free release, you're probably not winning that rep. I'm sorry. Like that's the type of athlete he is. That's the type of route runner separator he is. If you can get hands on him though, not the biggest guy, not necessarily like super strong, he is going to be someone you can affect in that way. So that's what they should be doing, especially early until they can kind of get him out of rhythm there.
100%, Shayne. And it kind of reminds me of the game plan that I said I would have implemented against Dallas on Sunday Night Football back in week 5. CeeDee Lamb. It's CeeDee Lamb or nothing for their offense. It's Malik Neighbors or nothing for the Giants offense. You stop Malik Neighbors, you stop their offense. You essentially do. And so, yeah, I would definitely have Porter shadow him. I'd have him make his life difficult. Hopefully the pressure can get there fast. Just jam at the line of scrimmage. Keep that safety over the top. Make Wandale beat you. Make Slayton beat you. I'd rather have anybody beat you except for the guy who is clearly the top target on the team. Shayne, another matchup that we can't ignore here is Ryan McCollum. Pray for Ryan McCollum's safety this week going against Dexter Lawrence. So he had a pretty good game.
He was good. He was fine. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with him.
It's nothing against McCollum. It truly isn't. I think that he came in. You stepped in as well as a third string center can do. Remember, Herbig's already out for the year. He stepped in as well as a third string center can do, and you opened up some holes. Like I think that he had a pretty good game against the Jets. But this is a whole different player that you're going against right now. Dexter Lawrence is going to play a lot of zero, going to play a lot of one tech, and he is going to knock you on your butt a few times. And so the Steelers might be wise to leave a Najee Harris, a Jaylen Warren in the backfield so that when you do break through the first line of defense, you've got someone else there who can at least cut you, who can get in the way of the quarterback.
Yeah, this is one of those matchups where it's like I don't want to say that the Steelers have no hope of doing well against Dexter Lawrence, but this is about as rough of a matchup as there is in the league this week, probably. And it's no offense to Ryan McCollum, like we said. He played totally fine last week, was not a problem. But, man, I really like if Zach Frazier's ankle is feeling a little bit better right now. Like it's just really unfair to ask McCollum to play well in this game. Like if his PFF grade is like below 40, I just want everybody to accept that that's okay. Like if you watch back the game and he's getting obliterated and you see the numbers come out, it's like, oh yeah, 32 pass block. It's like, it's okay. It's Dexter Lawrence. It's not really fun. Also, for once, even though it almost never works, except for like the one touchdown Najee had, might be good to actually run that toss sometimes because I don't know. I don't know if I want Lawrence right in the middle there against the run offense either. So definitely a very, very difficult matchup, and I just hope that they have some sort of a plan to help him. So.
You don't see matchups like this very often where it's like you legitimately have a third stringer going up against maybe the best player on that entire side of the football in the entire NFL. It could get ugly. And obviously this is not going to be a lot of true one-on-ones here. Like Mason McCormick's going to come over and help out. Seamal's going to help out. And you need to do that. Otherwise, you're just going to get driven back in an instant every play. But even with the double teams, I mean, this is a double team record. This is a guy that still has 9 sacks despite getting double teamed at a frequent rate. And so you'd like to see them at least slow down Dexter Lawrence. You can slow down Dexter Lawrence. That will help out significantly. And Brian Burns is another one. You got to account for Burns too. That speed and dip around the edge.
Fast. That's the key thing. When he wins, it's often quickly. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to meander my way around the tackle and get a sack late. Like he either wins quickly or usually doesn't always win at all. And that's totally fine as a pass rusher, but it is a thing where, if you don't want Wilson to be sitting in the pocket too long against a guy like that, if he does win his reps. So.
Yeah. And on this for the Steelers side, though, it's good luck, Nick McLeod and Deontay Banks trying to cover George Pickens if Wilson's giving you those moon balls down the field, because that is a matchup that absolutely favors Pittsburgh there. So hopefully they can at least take advantage that way if they get wrecked in a few other areas because of their lack of depth and because of the really talented players that they're going against. There's not many, on the Giants, but the ones who are there are absolute difference makers. And so they have the ability to wreck that game in ways. And so they'll have to make sure that those guys are accounted for. Last chance to get your questions in here. Shayne and I are going to give our predictions. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. All right, Shayne, let's move on to our game predictions for Steelers versus Giants. The Steelers are 5-2 right now. Will they advance to 6-2? I don't know if a lot of people predicted they would be at that point. A couple of games went their way that I don't think many predicted. And we kind of thought early in the season, before we did this, Shayne, the Steelers would have to have a good record going into the bye because of the teams they played afterwards. Well, now the schedule doesn't look as hard as it once did. Still hard. You still have the Ravens twice. You've got the Chiefs. On Christmas Day, you've got the Eagles. But the Bengals may not be as threatening as before. You still don't match up against them well because Burrow can just pick you apart.
Yeah.
But the Browns are a dumpster fire too. So maybe the second half will go a little bit easier. But you still, obviously, you want to be able to go into that bye week with a really good record. You have to be a 6-2 football team. Get your guys back, get healthy and ready to go. And I think that this would be obviously a tremendous step against a not so formidable foe that you need to be well prepared for on Monday Night Football. So give us your game prediction.
I do have the Steelers winning this game despite my trepidation about the situation and how often they typically can blow a game like this. But at 20-13, I think the offense is just okay. I think they do enough, get a couple plays here and there to get down the field, score a couple touchdowns early. The Giants offense struggles to get going. They get a little bit something going late, but not enough to really threaten. And the Steelers tack on a couple field goals to make it 20-13. And they escape with a win that probably looks harder than fans may have wanted it to look, but still comfortable with.
Okay. Let me get to a question real quick, and then I'll do my prediction. This is from Christian. I was scared Kupp would go to KC, but now I think we can actually get him. Would you give up a second? I would do a third in a heartbeat. I agree with you there. I think the third, I'm running that in. I mean, I got the Rams on speed dial for the third. The second, though, I agree. I think that's a little bit rich. I know it's what LA is asking for right now, but I do think you can talk them down if they truly are willing to get draft capital and try to kind of rebuild this team for the future. At least I would hope so. So honestly, I would do a third and a future conditional 5th round pick or something like that. I think that might be enough to get it done.
I think the most I'd be willing to give is a third that could be a second if we make like the conference title game or the Super Bowl or something like that. Like I think I'd be willing to do something like that because then it gives them the chance of getting a second round pick, but only if we get what we wanted out of the trade, right? Like so it kind of makes it a little bit more fair that way, but that's the most like it would have to be conditional and conditional on like team success, not like what Kupp really does for the offense.
Yeah.
And then a third though is definitely a third straight up would absolutely give that. But I don't know at this point how confident I am that Kupp gets moved, period. That's kind of my biggest thing with that. So
yeah, it is worth mentioning, though, those rumors from Diana Rossini of The Athletic. They're out there, and so it's not something that we can dismiss at all. But great question. Thanks for chiming in. And my prediction, Shayne, for Steelers versus Giants, I've got Steelers winning 26-9. So I do have them, third straight
that's a fun
blowout type game. Not as a convincing fashion maybe as some of these, but the Steelers are just a much better football team. I know that doesn't always matter. But you're playing at home again. You're playing a primetime game again. You've had time to prepare, just like the Giants have had time to prepare for you, but they're traveling to your city. They're playing against you. They are a 2-5 football team that doesn't have much talent, who doesn't have hope with Daniel Jones there. Russell Wilson, we saw him score 5 straight times to close out the game. This is a suspect defense that you can exploit in the secondary, even with the really impressive pass rush of Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns. I think that this is a game where the Steelers should be able to score over 20 points, and the Steelers defense should be able to hold the Giants under 17. Now we'll see how close that ends up being. Maybe it's a 2017 type game, but I have a feeling they should win this by more than a score. And so I would bet, if I was a betting person, I would bet over that spread of the 6.5 points. And so we'll see what ends up happening there. As we know, the Steelers can come back down to earth at any time too. So that's not out of their wheelhouse either.
Yeah.
All right. Any other thoughts you want to get to, Shane, before we close up the show?
No, another big show, which again, honestly, I kind of like because it allows us to get everything out there for the week. So definitely thank you guys for joining us. We had easily the most live viewers we've ever had. So shout out to all of you guys.
Yes.
Definitely come back every week. We have our shows on Monday too, but Tommy will give you all the details there.
Yes. Thanks, Christian, R. Barley, anybody who chimed in with comments today. We appreciate your questions and all the engagement in the chat. Lovely to see. The channel is growing quite rapidly, and we appreciate all of your support for that. If you want to hear more about Russell Wilson, Josh Yorish did a whole show on Wilson on Monday. Josh goes live every Monday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. We go live on YouTube every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you for joining us on the show today. You can follow Shayne on Twitter/X at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Steel Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also check us out on YouTube or ask Alexa to play the Steel Curtain Steelers podcast. And thanks again for listening to the Steel Curtain podcast.